Hi everybody, Kyle Austin from MLive.com here doing our weekly video beat writer chat. Joined today by Doug Lesmerises from Cleveland.com, Mike, and Mike Griffith from MLive.com. We're going to talk a little Buckeyes Spartans heading into tomorrow night's 8 p.m. matchup. I guess first thing for both of you guys, you look at kind of the tail of tape of these two teams, where they stand in the statistics, and they're really remarkably similar. And I'm wondering where you guys see the edge kind of for each of your teams that you cover. Mike, I'll start with you with Michigan State.
Well, I think Michigan State has played the better opponent this season, playing at Oregon. I think they've been on a bigger game setting, I suppose, and it's not like Ohio State's any stranger to big games, because certainly it's a traditional powerhouse and it's not. But there's so many new players on this Ohio State team, 4 new offensive linemen, for example. And I don't know how loud Spartan Stadium's going to get, if it's any louder than Beaver Stadium, if the game's really any bigger when you get right down to it. But I guess I feel like this Michigan State team is a more seasoned team, from quarterback at Connor Cook, to even those safeties that have got absolutely scorched against Oregon. They've felt the flame before, and I don't know if Ohio State really has.
Doug, where do you see Ohio State's advantage?
Yeah, I think Mike makes a lot of good points. When you look at the stats, like you said, it's remarkable. They're like 1 point away on offense and 3 points away on defense over the course of a whole year. But even the Nebraska game for Michigan State, that's 2 opponents that Michigan State has played that are better than anybody else that Ohio State has played. So Ohio State offensively especially has really stacked things up against inferior defenses. They scored 50 points in 4 straight games for the first time in school history. But what does it mean? They went to Penn State, they had a 17-point lead, and they let Penn State come back and tie that game and had to win it in double overtime. So for Ohio State, the closest thing to this game for them is the game last year against Michigan State in the Big Ten title game. Yes, they had their bowl game, but since then, even the Virginia Tech game, nobody thought Virginia Tech was as good as Virginia Tech played that night. So in terms of getting up for a game like this, I do think, Michigan State has been through more this year. I'll be curious to see. Ohio State has some young guys in some really key spots. Sometimes when you're young, you can get freaked out, or maybe you don't know enough to get freaked out. Maybe you just go make plays.
That's right. I think Doug's got a great point there, Kyle. Sometimes you don't know that you're supposed to be intimidated, or you don't know that's supposed to be the no-fly zone over there at Michigan State. So that may play into Ohio State's favor.
Mike, you mentioned the no-fly zone, and obviously me and you talk about this a lot. For Ohio State fans, obviously Michigan State's defense last year tops the nation in quite a few categories. How do you compare it right now to where it was at the end of last year?
Well, honestly, and Doug and I talked about this a little earlier this week. That may have been the best defense in the Big Ten 20 years, and certainly it ranked among the best defenses in college football in the last 10 years. When you look at a team that ranks in the top 3 statistically across the board, I don't even know when the last time that's been done. Only 3 other teams have ranked in the top 10 the last 3 years, and they've both got national titles in Florida State and Alabama. Obviously, they're not as developed or evolved as that defense was. When you have a 3-year starting linebacker like a Max Bullough, who Urban Meyer said last year before the Big Ten title game was like a coach on the field. Urban doesn't throw that around about opponents very often. He'd rather talk much more about his team being great than throwing bouquets to other players and other teams. But with Max Bullough, it gave Michigan State an incredible advantage to be able to adjust to myriad formations, audibles on the offense, and then defensively audible, effectively. Michigan State doesn't have that component this year. Now, what they do have is more speed and athleticism at the linebacker position. Are they playing as fast as Bullough and Danico Salen, those 3-year starters? Perhaps not yet. And then in the secondary, I think they really miss Isaiah Lewis, a guy who came up big against Ohio State. I think he had 13 tackles in the Big Ten title game. R.J. Williamson still breaking into it. Curtis Drummond, another guy back there. Both Ohio guys, maybe both guys with that extra incentive. I do think the defensive line is better this year than last year's.
All right, we're bringing in some reader questions too. If you're joining us live, type your question in the comment section below, and we'll answer as many as we can. Doug, I'm going to ask you one of the questions from one of our MLive.com readers, which is that Ohio State, he says Ohio State fans kind of continue to talk about the youth of this team, but you look at their recruiting rankings year after year, they're bringing in some of the best guys in the country. So his question is, with a solid recruiting classes, why does Ohio State have the number of young starters that it has at this point?
Well, the senior class right now is the whole. That's the group that was in that chaotic time right after Jim Tressel left. Like, for instance, Braxton Miller, it's his 4th year on campus. He was recruited by Jim Tressel. Then everything went crazy. So the young players, that's actually Urban Meyer. If you look at guys, the 3rd-year guys right now are the guys who came in right at the end of Urban Meyer's first recruiting class. But, for instance, young guys I'm talking about who are going to play big in this game are, for instance, their 2 H-backs, Dontre Wilson and Jalen Marshall, I think have to be really effective. They're both 2nd-year guys who were major 4- and 5-star recruits for Urban Meyer. So, actually, the youth of this team is Urban Meyer's stamp on it, and the fact that maybe they don't have as many 5th-year seniors and seniors as Michigan State is because those classes were right when everything was going nuts in Columbus.
Yeah, you mentioned, Braxton Miller. Obviously, he's been the big story with the injury this year, and I think the biggest dust-up this week was Tawan Jones's comments, which I think some people kind of took a little bit on their face value. I think, if I'm interpreting correctly, he said that J.T. Barrett is a better quarterback in that system, not a better athlete, not a more experienced guy, but his skill set is better in that system. And, Doug, I'm wondering if somebody that's seen him a lot, is that a fair assessment for someone to make?
Yeah, I mean, it is. That's sort of the debate that's been going on in Columbus all year. I mean, there are people here who are eagerly grasping the J.T. Barrett era and kind of wondering what's going to happen to Braxton next year if he comes back healthy. And then others are saying, hey, Braxton Miller's been a great player here. If he comes back healthy, he's got to be the guy. But what we see, J.T. Barrett not as dynamic as a runner as Braxton Miller. You know what you're getting more with J.T. Barrett, for good and for bad. J.T. Barrett has done a great job running the system. The talk in the offseason was Braxton Miller was going to run the system more than he ever has here. They thought they had more playmakers. They didn't need to rely on him to run around like a maniac and make plays on his own so much. So maybe Braxton Miller would be doing this as well, and maybe it's a function of the offense as a whole working better together. But regardless, what we're seeing, J.T. Barrett is more efficiently running this offense than really it's been run probably since Urban Meyer got here.
No. And then, Mike, we talk about Michigan State's defense, talking about their offense. We'll stick with quarterbacks, Connor Cook. I mean, how much can Ohio State fans expect him to be different when they see him on Saturday compared to when they saw him at the end of last year?
Well, they saw a pretty good version of Connor Cook in the Big Ten championship game. He played pretty well. He still made a bad decision and threw an interception. I think the bigger difference is that Ohio State is more prepared for Michigan State to look like Michigan State looks right now. I think they were caught off guard. I mean, heck, I think a lot of us were caught off guard by Connor Cook throwing the ball, and I don't have the numbers in front of me how many passes he attempted, but I know he threw for over 300 yards. It was then a career high. I'm not sure if he'd thrown that many passes in a game before. We'd all become accustomed to Michigan State being a ground and pound. And when I do a lot of these national interviews, it's pretty clear who's watched Michigan State this year and who hasn't. Because if you haven't been paying attention, you still think that Jeremy Langford is the whole key to this offense, when really he's just been a bit piece, a complementary piece. It's really been more about Connor Cook and Tony Lippett hooking up for big 100-yard performances, multi-catch games, and Connor's ability to go downfield in the evolution of the Michigan State pass game. We're seeing more spread elements now than we did maybe against Ohio State, more of the jet sweep. Doug told me earlier this week Ohio State is a very difficult team to run wide against. I'll be curious to see if that means that Michigan State can gut them up the middle like they were able to do against Michigan a week ago. I'll also be curious to see the game plan. We know it's supposed to drop into the 30s. We know it's a damp day, although we don't know whether it'll be raining at game time. But we saw what Michigan State did in inclement windy weather against Michigan. They kind of turned down the volume on Connor Cook and those downfield throws, and they might be inclined to do that against Ohio State, a team that leads the Big Ten with 14 interceptions. So does Michigan State look more like Michigan State of last year on Saturday night, or do they look more like the Michigan State team that Ohio State saw in the Big Ten title game? And I guess Mark D'Antonio probably doesn't even know. I guess we'll have to wait and see how that first quarter goes. But I know this, Doug and Kyle, I know both of these teams have come out of the gates tremendous, and neither one of them is used to being behind after the first quarter.
That's right. I want to take a step back for a minute here and look big picture. You look at where the Big Ten is right now, and it's really Michigan State, Ohio State, and then everybody else, it seems like, which is the importance of this game. But maybe this is a little more true for Michigan State, but I'm wondering for either one of you, how much do you think these teams are being hurt kind of on a national perspective by the quality of competition they're playing week in and week out when they're not playing each other?
It's killing them. The Big Ten is killing its best teams. And I think you need to throw Nebraska in that mix as well. Nebraska beating Miami is looking like a better and better non-conference win every week.
Mm-hmm.
When you see Kansas State beat Oklahoma State, 5-4 Oklahoma State, and jump Michigan State last week in the committee's poll because the committee viewed that as a quality win. Oklahoma State hasn't beaten anybody good all year. If Michigan State had beaten Purdue, nobody would have viewed that as a quality win. That's how people view the middle and bottom of this conference. It stinks. And when you're trying to compare the Big Ten against the rest of the world, it is holding these teams back. I think Michigan State, certainly, and probably Ohio State and probably Nebraska, could compete with anybody out there. I think Ohio State and Michigan State are good on both sides of the ball. I think they can win scoring. I think they can win with defense. But they don't get to show it. They don't get to show it in this terrible league where week after week you win by 40 and nobody respects it. So I don't know when that's going to change. It's been the case for years, but it absolutely magnifies a game like this. In the SEC, they play games like this twice a weekend. In the Big Ten, they play games like this once or twice a year.
Well, Doug, I think it's got something to do with scheduling, and I think it does have something to do with national narrative. You know, you and I and Kyle have probably brought this up on radio shows and discussions, but did anybody see Indiana beat Missouri at Missouri and take note that Missouri currently leads the SEC East and beats teams in the SEC that are competing with the supposed national powers on Saturdays? I mean, I'm pretty sure Missouri beat South Carolina, right? And South Carolina beat Georgia. I mean, the whole cyclical, but you got to schedule bigger games than that. Michigan State tried to. They had a home-and-home scheduled with Alabama, and there were 2 contracts on it. And basically, Alabama called Michigan State during this past off-season and said, hey, remember that first part of the deal where you come down here to Tuscaloosa and play us? Yeah, we want to keep that. But that second part where we go up there to Spartan Stadium, can we move that to a neutral site? And Mark Hollis said, whoa, wait a minute. They want us to go to Alabama, and then they're going to buy out that return game and never play us up in East Lansing unless we agree to go neutral site. Well, who's going to hold Alabama accountable for that? Nobody. Does the SEC have to play home and homes anymore? No. Wisconsin has to travel to Houston, Texas, in the backyard of Louisiana. They're going to call that a neutral site game against LSU? Are you kidding me? And
but they get a return. They get a return at Lambeau.
But this year that doesn't help. Right now, everybody and people forget Wisconsin played LSU even. They should have won that football game, Doug. And we saw LSU beat supposedly the number 4 team in the country last week, right? And that team, Ole Miss, couldn't score more than 7 points. So I think there needs to be a little bit more conscientiousness of transitive properties here. To me, it looks very selective, and I think that the SEC plays the SEC, and therefore, you know, I mean, when did a win over Texas Tech or Texas A&M, you know, lose value? Well, about 3 weeks ago. But when they beat them earlier this year, everybody was like, wow, look at they beat Texas. Texas A&M isn't even a top 25 team now, right?
Last question before we get to our picks here at the end. I was hoping if you guys could kind of compare and contrast these coaches. I think it's a really interesting coaching matchup that's developed over the last couple of years, and now with them being in the same division going forward, we're going to see a lot of these guys facing off against one another. Just either you want to weigh in on kind of how that dynamic can play out.
I mean, I think one of the most interesting parts of this is that Mark D'Antonio was Jim Tressel's right-hand man. And for Ohio State fans, and I've written about this, you know, in years past, the Tressel-Meyer matchup did not go well in the 2006 national title game. And if you ever want to see that matchup again, the closest you're going to get to it is Urban Meyer at Ohio State against Mark D'Antonio at Michigan State, in terms of style, in terms of how you play, in terms of how you coach. I think it's a fascinating thing, and that's why I hope I've tried to, maybe overdone it, but tried to pump this up as a rivalry this week because I want it to be. I want Michigan State to continue this. I want Michigan State to win 11 games for the 4th time in 5 years and keep this rolling, because I think Mark D'Antonio has proven to be not just a good coach, but a program builder, which is a different thing. And I think he's a great contrast to Urban Meyer. Offense versus defense. Obviously, huge national recruiting. With obviously, Urban Meyer still focuses on Ohio, but Mark D'Antonio has done a great job getting some great Ohio kids and developing them. It's just a great contrast in styles. They're probably similar in a lot of ways too, but I think it's a great coaching matchup and a great matchup of programs.
Yeah, I would agree with Doug. I think there are a lot of significant differences, and I was at that Ohio State-Florida game, and I was there when Ohio State won the national title over Miami as well, and you're right. 2 different styles, 2 different types of leaders. I think both good for college football. I think certainly both worth their paycheck. And, I saw what Urban Meyer did in the SEC. It was amazing that he was able to take over that league. He slayed the dragon. He beat Nick Saban. And he did it with great players. He did it with, I don't know if I'd call it an innovative system, but certainly one that worked. Doug, I think what's missing from that Florida team that beat Ohio State in that 2007 national title game is Percy Harvin. Now, I know Ohio State's got a guy in Devin Smith. You told me he's a track guy that averages 27 yards a catch, but Percy Harvin really made that offense, and it's just a matter of Urban Meyer getting his guys in there. One of the interesting comparisons I'll throw at you, this Braxton Miller thing, there may be a silver lining to this cloud. One of the things I think happened recently here at Michigan with Brady Hoke was he went with the guy that was there, Denard Robinson, the guy who really didn't run the offense but made plays, much like a Braxton Miller, I would say. Very good off the scramble, but the coach is over there and doesn't really have his hands on the controls when you've got a quarterback like that. I think this is going to enable Urban Meyer to kind of get his system going a little bit sooner, because I think Barrett's more of a system guy. And I think that's what Urban Meyer needs to do before we really see his fingerprints on this program. Conversely, Mark D'Antonio in year 7 has kept the staff together and has been able to recruit to his system. So I don't know if it's really fair to say we're seeing Mark D'Antonio against Urban Meyer's system. I think Urban Meyer is still in the transition from Tressel ball into what he's trying to get done up here.
All right, guys, we'll wrap up with this. Predictions for this weekend. Give me who's going to win, give me a score, and give me why. Doug, I'll start with you.
Well, our picks just went up a couple minutes ago at Cleveland.com, so I can divulge this. I went with Michigan State 30-28. I will be surprised if it's not close in the 4th quarter. I think it's possible that Ohio State's best is better than Michigan State's best. I think that's possible if the Buckeyes are young, but if they hit on all cylinders, I think that's possible. I think it's more likely Michigan State plays closer to its ceiling at home with experienced guys, having played 2 other really big games this year. If the ball, I expect the game to come down to somebody having the ball with a chance to win late, and I think there's a better chance that Connor Cook and Michigan State would get that done against the Ohio State defense than J.T. Barrett and the Buckeyes would get it done against the Michigan State defense.
Mike, how about you?
Well, I don't think the game is going to be that close in the 4th quarter. I think Michigan State will have control of it by then. I do think that we'll see some fireworks early. I think we'll see Connor Cook sacked by Joey Bosa. I think we'll see Michigan State have its struggles in the run game. I think we'll see Ohio State has superior special teams. But ultimately, I think Michigan State's better at the line of scrimmage, both on offense and defense. And I think they're a more experienced team. And I think they have more focus. It's hard for Ohio State. 2 weeks ago they had a very emotional win over Penn State. Last week they really didn't have much of a test at all. And a lot of these guys come into this game really not knowing what to expect. I mean, this is unfamiliar turf for Ohio State. I mean, it's a tremendous program with a lot of tradition and power. Somebody hand them the underdog hat. They don't know where to put. They don't know how to put this thing on. They don't know how to play this role. And Michigan State doesn't know how to play the role of favorite. It's an interesting dichotomy of sorts between these programs in unfamiliar positions. But when it's all said and done, I just think Michigan State's got better line play, and I think Connor Cook is a better quarterback. Ultimately, I think it comes down to the quarterbacks, and I've got Michigan State winning 31-16, and I don't know how many fans are going to be around at the end of that game.
All right, guys. Well, that'll do it for this week. I want to thank Doug and Mike for joining me, and we'll see you Saturday from Spartan Stadium.